Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 163, Bill Virdon. Now, if you're like me, you probably remember Bill Virdon as a no-nonsense, very stoic manager during the 1970s and 1980s for the Pittsburgh Pirates, the New York Yankees, the Houston Astros, and the Montreal Expos. But what few recall is his terrific playing career that started with the St. Louis Cardinals and finished with the Pittsburgh Pirates. His story is remarkable. He was a terrific athlete as a youth, but he opted to play football, basketball, and run track and field in high school rather than play baseball, which he did recreationally. But he heard about a tryout for the New York Yankees and he hitched a ride with a friend to the tryout. The Yankees liked what they saw and they signed Virdon. However, Virdon's friend didn't meet with the same success. The Yankees signed Virdon, but they didn't keep him around for long, and they traded him to the Cardinals, where he won Rookie of the Year in 1955. And despite that honor, the very next season, the Cardinals traded Virdon to the Pittsburgh Pirates, where he established himself as one of baseball's most consistent and solid ball players during the late 1950s and 1960s. A student of the game who learned under the great Danny Murtaugh, Virdon, after his playing days ended, became a manager and had a terrific 13-year career where he won 995 games, lost 921, and he led his teams to 3 first-place finishes. On today's episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes, we're going to take a look back at Virdon's playing days and at the helm of the several teams he managed with my guest, David Jerome, who wrote a wonderful biography about Virdon called Bill Virdon, A Life in Baseball. Before we get there, though, a few notes. Please follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on X at SportsFHeroes. Look for the Sports Forgotten Heroes page on Facebook. And wherever it is you are watching or listening, please hit that subscribe button and give Sports Forgotten Heroes a follow and a like. And if you want to reach out, please shoot me an email. Send it to sportsfh.info@gmail.com. That's sportsfh.info@gmail.com. And as always, I thank you for your support. Okay, let's get into today's show with my guest, David Jerome. David, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. So glad you could join.
Warren, it's really good to be with you this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Awesome. Yeah, this should be fun. Bill Virdon, I remember watching him as a manager with the Yankees, with the Astros, and with the Expos. Don't remember a whole lot about his time with the Pirates, but I did look back. I have a baseball card of him as the manager of the Pirates, so there you go. Where does your interest in Bill Virdon stem from?
Well, I knew him and his wife Shirley personally. We met here in Springfield, Missouri. I live just outside of Springfield, and we attended the same church together. Starting in July of 2019, I became an associate pastor at his and Shirley's church. I was told that there was a former Major League Baseball player that attended that church, but I had no idea it was Bill Virdon. And I didn't meet Bill and Shirley until about 3 weeks after I started there. I was just kind of busy getting my feet on the ground there. And then I walked down to the seniors group that they have every Thursday, and it was Bill Virdon. And I said, oh my. So I got to know him, and my wife and I got to know him and Shirley pretty well that summer and fall. And by November, and I have no idea, Warren, why I went down this path, But I was driving up to a meeting in Columbia, Missouri, which is a couple hours from here. And I got to thinking, nobody's ever written a book about Bill Virdon. And I called the seniors director uh, at the church at his home that night. And I said, has anybody ever approached Bill about doing his biography? He said, yeah, I think a couple of people have, but he didn't like their motivations or something, and he declined. And I said, well, could you ask him what do you think about me doing it? Since you know him better than I do, maybe you can run it by him. He said, okay, after somewhat of a long pause. And then the following week, him and Shirley both agreed for me to do it. And then I started researching, and I knew I was immediately in over my head based on everything that he had done in his life. And I looked at my wife. I said, what did I just get myself into? But I have to tell you, Warren, it was one of the most joyful things I've ever been involved in. It was just wonderful, the whole thing. They only lived about 15 minutes from where we live, so we spent a lot of time together, even during COVID, because COVID started, in late February of 2020, and we were able to spend a lot of time because we didn't go out and socialize, and they weren't doing much of it, so we felt pretty safe being with each other.
Yeah, it's writing a book is quite the undertaking. It's quite the experience, and it is very rewarding. So kudos
Yes,
to you.
thank you. I appreciate it, and congratulations on your publication too coming up.
Thank you so much. So he had an interesting upbringing when it comes to baseball. Um, he didn't play, at least the way I understand it, on his high school baseball team. He played in other sports, football and basketball and track. And how did he develop his baseball skills? And how did he get himself noticed enough to pursue a Major League Baseball career?
Well, that's a good question. Yes, he was a star starting quarterback for the football team. He was a star basketball player. He was a star on the track and field team down at West Plains, Missouri. Just a little side point. The spring, his senior year, 1949, in high school, they had a track meet, and there were several schools involved. And West Plains came in first place with 91 total points. The second place high school finished at 60 points. Bill Virdon accounted for 31 points by himself
Wow.
in four different events. So he was just a phenomenal athlete. Well, in the summer of '48, between his junior and senior year, Gene Richmond, a friend of his who was a couple years older, was heading out to Clay Center, Kansas, to play amateur baseball. That's northwest of Manhattan, where K State is, northeast of Abilene, where Eisenhower's museum is. But
Hmm.
anyway, Bill said, "Well, can I ride out there with you?" And Gene said, "Well, sure." Gene had a car, so they rode out there, and they both tried out. And after about 2 weeks, Gene Richmond was sent back home, and they kept Bill Virdon. And so Bill had to ride a bus back eventually at the end of the summer. But he was playing shortstop at Clay Center that summer, and after he graduated from high school the following year, he went back out to Clay Center, and the legendary scout for the New York Yankees, Tom Greenwade, who signed Mickey Mantle in May of 1949 with a $1,500 signing bonus, must have scouted Bill, but Bill doesn't remember Tom being out there. But he was invited to a Yankees tryout camp in Branson, Missouri, down at Meng Field in August of 1949. So he went down there. There's about 125 young men that were invited to that camp. And at the end of that 2 week camp, they signed 8 of them, and Bill was one of them. And
Wow.
they gave him an $1,800 signing bonus. Uh, and that's where he also met his really good friend, probably his best friend in baseball, Mel Wright, who was a pitcher from Arkansas. And Mel would go ahead and be Bill's pitching coach when Bill managed the Pirates, the Yankees, the Astros, and the Expos later on. But they had a wonderful, warm friendship. But backing up just a second, Bill had gotten a scholarship to play basketball at Drury College, which is now Drury University here in Springfield. He knew full well that he was only going to go that one semester because the Yankees had just signed him, and he was going to go into their farm system after the first of the year in 1950. So that's kind of how he got noticed by Tom Greenway, the agent for the an agent for the or scout, excuse me, for the New York Yankees.
How did he, or what made him think that he had the skills to at least go to a tryout? I mean, was he playing in recreational ball or something? I mean, and of all positions, shortstop. Talk to me about that. Where did his skills? How did he develop those skills that were good enough to be discovered?
Bill was born in Hazel Park, Michigan, which is northwest of Detroit, and they lived up there until Bill was about 12 or 13 years old. But legend has it that Bill went to his very first baseball game at Tiger Stadium when he was 1 week old. And so his dad and mom encouraged him in all sports pretty much, especially his dad, Charlie. But Bill was just very athletic. He was a gifted athlete. And even though that the West Plains didn't have a baseball program in the school system at that point, he played town ball all the time during the summer. And he was able to hone his skills. He practiced hard throughout the week or wherever. But he developed his skills. He was pretty much self-made. He was able to watch others and learn from them. But yeah, he wanted to be a shortstop. But he went to Independence, Kansas in 1950 to play for in the D League over there for the Yankees. Bunny Mick was his manager, and Bunny's the one that put him in center field, and that's where he stayed the rest of his career, beginning in the summer of 1950.
Mm-hmm. So he gets signed by the Yankees, but he doesn't play for the Yankees.
He's playing in their farm system.
Yeah, they ultimately put him in a deal, um, and he gets traded to the Cardinals for Slaughter. Um, yeah, so why did the Yankees? What did the Cardinals see in Virdon? And how did he end up? With St. Louis.
Well, I don't know all the details behind that, but somewhere along the line, they decided that Enos Slaughter maybe should. They wanted to start rebuilding the team in the youth movement type of thing, and Bill was still pretty young at that point. Mel Wright also got traded with Bill, and I think Littlefield also went over there with him. Uh, but Bill was so talented. What happened was he went to St. Louis after he played in 1955 as an NL Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
But he would play in Rochester, New York, for the Redbirds the year before, after he gotten traded from New York. He went down to New York. He went to New York spring training, and he's out there in the outfield with Hank Bauer, Mickey Mantle, and a couple of other folks. He's out there shagging balls, taking turns. They were doing batting practice in the infield, and somehow it's Bill's turn to catch a ball, and he's all business on the ball field, and he knew that as long as Mickey Mantle was in center field, he was not going to have a chance to play in the outfield. And so it was his turn to catch the ball. He was thinking about his cutoff man. He didn't realize that Casey Stengel had gotten between him and the cutoff man, and his back was to Bill, and Bill hit him right between the numbers and knocked him to the turf. And Hank Bauer and Mantle and everybody else, they just dropped to the turf, and they were pointing up at Bill Virdon. He did it. He did it. And Bill said, I got traded 2 weeks later to the St. Louis Cardinals. And and so how that all came to be, I don't know for sure. But they sent him right off to Rochester, and he was the International League hitting champion that year. I mean, he had a remarkable year hitting that year. Then he went to winter ball down in Cuba that winter, excuse me, and that's where he met Kenny Boyer, and they became good friends. And the Cardinals were scouting him the whole time he was at winter ball, and they just loved him. And there was no question they were going to take him to St. Louis at the beginning of the '55 season out of spring training.
Yeah, I mean, he had some pretty good years in the minors in '54. As you said, he had 333 with Rochester, and then he winds up with the Cardinals. Again, going back to the fact he basically played recreational ball, works his way up to the major leagues. This game is easy. He's the National League Rookie of the Year. He hits 281, cranks 17 homers, knocks in 68. Tell me about that rookie year and maybe even what made it so significant beyond those numbers.
Well, his range factor, for one thing, Warren, he was fast. He had an incredible arm. And like Dick Grote told me, I talked to him for this book that I wrote, and I talked to him a couple of weeks before he passed away. He was so intuitive in the outfield. He had an instinct about him that no one could really put their finger on. And so beyond the statistics and everything else, and as a defensive player, he just had an incredible instinct about him. His range factor was off the charts. So that was good. He's also a good clutch hitter on the offensive side. With the Pirates later on, when he got traded in early '56, he became the leadoff hitter, and Dick Grote would follow him. And so it is basically a hit-run combination between the two of them. Bill, he had a 267 career batting average or something like that, and only 91 homers. But he could, and they called him the Quail because Bob Prince, the sportscaster for the Pittsburgh Pirates, said every time he hit a ball, it looked like it was a covey of quail coming out. And so he would just kind of bounce it out of the outfield, from the infield to the outfield, and he'd be able to hit it well enough to get a base hit. But yeah, and the Cardinals thought so much of him when they watched him in winter ball and then in spring training, that they thought so much of him. They put Stan Musial on first base, brought him in from the outfield, made room for Bill Virdon in center field.
And yet, he wins Rookie of the Year. He's a natural. He's obviously a natural athlete. Displaces, as you said, Stan Musial. And then the following season, they trade him. Why?
Well, the story behind that is that Frank, the trader Lane, he basically went to a ball game with Joel Brown, the general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and they were in a game, and he observed, I guess, Bobby Del Greco, the center fielder for the Pirates. He hit 2 home runs in one game, and Bill didn't get off to the best start during the '56 season with the Cardinals, but Trader Lane was so impressed by Del Greco hitting those 2 homers in the same game, they decided to trade and Bill Virdon. And so that's the only reason that Bill got, because who else would trade the '55 Rookie of the Year at the beginning of the next season? But Trader Lane did that. And just kind of a funny story behind that. At that time, they were on the road. The Cardinals were on an East Coast swing. I think they were getting ready to play Philadelphia. I'm not sure. But Shirley Virdon was at the hospital with her daughter, and she was getting ready to have a tonsillectomy over in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Shirley had no idea what had happened the night before, because Bill found out the night before that he was going to be traded. And so they had this little music box on the railing of the hospital beds. And Shirley put a nickel or a dime in there just to entertain Deborah, who was only, 3 years old or something like that. 3 years old. And the news comes on. The 1955 NL Rookie of the Year, Bill Virdon, has been traded to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Well, that's how Shirley found out. And
Wow.
Bill was rooming with Kenny Boyer on the road, and it was late when he found out, and he didn't want to bother Shirley the night before because he knew she had to get up and take Debbie to the hospital the next day. But they were
Well,
devastated. They wanted to be in St. Louis for their whole Major League Baseball career.
well, he never made it back to St. Louis, but he sure spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh.
Yes, he did. Yeah, 10
Uh,
seasons in the center field with next to Roberto Clemente.
yeah, I mean, and he was a good ball player, especially that first year with Pittsburgh. While he did get off to a slow start with St. Louis, I think he was only hitting 211 through 24 games. I mean, he lit the world on fire when he got to St. Louis. He played for St. Louis.
319 in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean, with Pittsburgh, I mean, he had one heck of a year. He hit 334 actually for the Pirates that year, and but averaged out to 319, and he had MVP votes. So he adapted quite well to Pittsburgh, and they weren't an awful team, and he was part of the team that ultimately made it to the 1960 World Series, and he was an integral part of that. Tell us about the drive to 1960 and how integral that season was to Bill Virdon's career.
Well, backing up just a second to 1956, he was in a race with Hank Aaron for the NL batting title in '56. He came in second behind Hank Aaron. I think Hank Aaron was at 328 or 329. Bill came in at 319, and so he finished second for the batting title that year. But moving forward, Danny Murtaugh took over as manager of the Yankees about mid-season, I believe, in 1958, something like that. And Bill just absolutely admired and adored Danny Murtaugh.
He took over? He took over the Pirates.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
What did I say?
Yankees.
Yeah, no, I meant the Pirates, of course. But Bill told me at the beginning of the 1960 season, following the '59 season where they didn't do too bad, at the start of the 1960 season, he said, David, in the clubhouse, we just knew it was going to be our year after all those years of being also ran. And so, sure enough, I mean, it was just an electric year. I mean, it was Dick Groat was the MVP. I mean, it was just an incredible year for the Pirates that season. And then to go up against the mighty Yankees in the Fall Classic was something else. But as far as Bill, there were two games in the 1960 World Series to me that made Bill Virdon unquestionably a very good elite player. The first game, Yogi Berra. I think Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris were on base. Yogi Berra hits what was for sure a double hit to right center field, and of course Roberto Clemente and Bill are running for the ball. Bill actually cuts into the left leather cleat of Roberto Clemente's when they were both going for the ball, and Bill catches it. That was game one. And game four, Bob Serb also hit a double. And Bill said that by far was the more acrobatic catch that he made between those two. But they both were very instrumental in the Pirates winning both of those games. If Bill had not made those two catches in those two games, I think the outcome of the World Series would have been much different. And then, of course, Tony Kubek's incident in the final game in the bottom of the eighth inning in Game 7. Bill was up there at bat, and he hits what was for sure an out to shortstop. But the ball bounces off the turf and hits Tony Kubek in the throat, and Bill makes it safely to first base, which opens up a rally with Hal Smith bringing in 3 runs. The whole thing changes from that point on. But Tony Kubek got hit in the throat, spitting up blood, didn't want to leave the game, but they made him leave. They take him into the locker room, lay him out on the table. He goes to the hospital, spends the night after the World Series is over. Mickey Mantle's in tears because that's his good friend. But a lot of people don't talk about that particular play. They talk about Danny Murtaugh's walk-off homer in the ninth. But Bill made a name for himself. Everybody
Bill
that I heard
Mazeroski. You mean Bill Mazeroski's walk?
What did I say?
Danny Murtaugh.
No. Bill Mazeroski, who we recently lost.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I must be getting old. Bill Mazeroski, of course. We just lost him not too long ago, of course.
Yeah. How did we're gonna, I always say this. I don't go through everything in detail in the book. If I do, then there's no reason to buy the book. So we jump around a little. How did Virdon get along with his teammates?
Oh, they loved him, respected him, and he did them as well. That was a really close-knit, tight ball club. Bob Skinner in left field, Roberto Clemente in right, Dick Grote at short, Danny Murtaugh second, Don Hoke at third, Hal Smith catcher, on and on and on. Bob Friend, Roy Face, Vern Law. The whole team got along very, very well. I'm not aware of any incident where there's any angst or anything on that team during the time that Bill was a player.
He had some really good seasons. 1960, the big year when he hit 264. He 8 homers, 40 ribbies. I mean, he was I call him just a solid all-around baseball player, and obviously a student of the game. And it's just, again, so funny that this is a guy that did not play baseball in high school. He played the other sports and played recreationally, but was such a good athlete that he gets discovered and goes on to have a solid major league career. For his career, he hit 267, 91 home runs, had an on-base percentage of 316. I mean, the guy, today's numbers, his OPS was 89. OPS plus 89. I mean, a good ball player, rookie of the year, won a Gold Glove. But I think deep down inside, through all this, he's studying and learning. And he's learning from a great manager in Danny Murtaugh. And ultimately, this is what he wants to do. He wants to become a manager. What was it about managing that so intrigued Bill Virdon?
Well, he knew that his playing career was limited, like every ball player, and he knew he wanted to go into coaching or something like that eventually. And why not stay in the major leagues and coach? And so he knew that he was probably going to have to in 1964, at the end of the season, he told Shirley back home here in Springfield, he said, "I think next year is going to be my last year." He said, "I just don't feel I've got 100%," because Bill had high expectations of his performance, and he just felt at that point, 33, 34 years old, that he was not able to give quite as much as he thought he should. And so he started thinking about coaching, and I think he approached the Pirates organization in '65 about the idea of being on their coaching staff. Joe L. Brown, for some reason, I know Joe thought a lot of Bill Virdon. Joe L. Brown did not make room for Bill to be added to their coaching staff at the end of the '65 season. So he was looking elsewhere, different organizations, and he ended up joining the New York Mets organization. He became the manager of Williamsport, the AA affiliate up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, in '66. And that's where he first met Nolan Ryan, who was very young. And then the following year, he got elevated to go down to Jacksonville to the AAA affiliate, the Jacksonville Suns. And in the fall of '67, sure enough, the Pirates hired him as a hitting coach, and he stayed with the Pirates from that point on as in some capacity as a coach. Getting elevated by the time they get to the World Series against the Baltimore Orioles, gets elevated to to be the bench coach under Danny Murtaugh. And Danny Murtaugh pretty much made the comment that Bill Virdon gets it. In other words, he knows he could be a manager on any club, basically. And so I think with that kind of an endorsement, when Danny finally decided to retire, Danny wasn't in the best of health by the end of the '71 season. And so Bill was over in Puerto Rico managing a team in winter ball, and he gets notified that they would like for him to be the manager for the Pittsburgh Pirates starting with the '72 season.
Yeah, I mean, the Pirates were a good team. There's no doubt about it. I mean, they won the National League East in 1970 under Murtaugh. They won the National League East, the National League. They won the World Series in 1971 under Murtaugh. And in 1972, Murtaugh gets ill. Virdon takes over, and he leads the team into the playoffs against the Big Red Machine. I mean, Pittsburgh had a heck of a year, 96 and 59. They took the Reds. At that time, it was a 5-game series. The National League Championship Series. Again, back then it was you only had 4 divisions. You had the National League East, National League West, American League East, American League West, and the winner of each division played each other in the Championship Series, and then moved on to the World Series. So the Pirates lost to the Reds in '72, and the Reds ultimately lost to the Oakland Athletics, their first 3 straight World Championships for the A's. But what qualities did Virdon pick up from Murtaugh that he included in his style of managing? And
that's a question I've been asked before, and I can tell you that Bill probably picked up something. He learned well under Murtaugh. I'll just say that. But at the same time, Bill Virdon was his own person. He didn't parrot Danny Murtaugh. I mean, he didn't want to be Danny Murtaugh 2.0. He was Bill Virdon. And the team respected him. Like Dick Grote told me, he said, David, when Bill was in the outfield, he was a coach in the outfield as much as he was a player because of his instinct and everything else. He was able to work with Bob Skinner and even Roberto Clemente, and he would back up Mazeroski and Grote. When the ball went through, they knew that Bill Virdon was going to be on Johnny on the spot out there. But he had natural leadership abilities, I think, just as much as his athletic abilities were natural. He was a very driven individual. He wanted perfection in himself and others. That didn't go well when he went over to the Yankees eventually, that work ethic he had. But he had a very powerful work ethic. And if he thought you were slacking off, he'd let you know about it. Danny did the same thing, but I think Bill was even a little bit more aggressive in that area. He wanted people to give it all on the field. And I don't, Danny may have wanted the same thing. I don't know. Bill never really told me that, but he just said he was the best. He just considered Danny Murtaugh the best manager that he ever played for.
Virdon must have had such great respect throughout the game because he wins the National League East his first year as a manager. Pirates don't do all that well the second year, 1973.
No, they
Um,
don't. There's a couple of reasons for that.
yeah. So take me, what happened in 73?
Well, on December 31st, 1972, Roberto Clemente died tragically in a plane
Yes.
crash off the coast of Puerto Rico after taking supplies aid to Nicaragua. Uh, and they were never able to recover his body.
To
Bill
this
Virdon,
day. To this day.
yeah, right, and it was, and so they a whole contingent uh, to include the commissioner, I believe it was Bowie Kuhn. They all flew to Puerto Rico for a memorial service. It devastated the locker room in Pittsburgh, and certainly the fans of Pittsburgh. Another thing that happened was the issue surrounding Steve Blass, the pitcher. Steve Blass was a remarkable pitcher. You know, he was a hero during the 71 World Series. There's no question about it. He had a good year in 72. But for some reason, even Steve Blass told me this when I was interviewing him in Pittsburgh in my hotel room, is that basically he acquired what became known as the Steve Blass disease. For some reason, he couldn't get the ball over the plate. And so he was really suffering. That probably cost the Pirates over 20 games in 73. Well, that would have made the difference, perhaps, in their season if Steve was on top of everything. No one could ever figure out what, and Steve to this day doesn't know what happened. Uh, but it, but Bill uh, still thought highly of Steve. But by August of that year, it cost Bill Virdon his job. But later on, Joel Brown would say it was a mistake to have fired Bill Virdon. It
Yeah.
wasn't his fault.
I mean, he was just so well respected in the game. Sure enough, Danny Murtaugh comes back to replace Bill Virdon. He dealt with the incredible tragedy of Clemente. Um, Steve Blass just forgetting how to pitch, I guess. The Pirates are 67 and 69, and they let Virdon go. He was not unemployed for very long because in 1974, the Yankees decide, let's bring in Bill Virdon to manage the team, and he does a pretty good job. The Yankees go 89 and 73, finish in second place. Tell me about that first experience he had with George Steinbrenner and managing the New York Yankees.
Well, during winter meetings down in Houston in December of 73, Bill was en route to Denver to the AAA affiliate for the Astros to be the manager out there, but he never made it to Denver. Uh, Somewhere along the line, Gabe Paul or somebody called him and asked him if he would like to come in for an interview for the manager position in New York. And Bill said, yeah. And so he gets on. And before he leaves the house here in Springfield, the only thing that Shirley says to him, remember, money's not everything. So he arrives in New York, I think it's January 3rd, goes into discussions with Gabe Paul, and they come to terms. And the next day, on January 4th, I believe it was, George Steinbrenner introduces him as his new manager.
Replacing Ralph Houk.
Yeah, Ralph Houk had all he wanted of George Steinbrenner by the end of the year, the previous season. So, yeah, Ralph Houk was not a happy camper when he left being manager of the Yankees. Um, and the thing about George Steinbrenner, he kind of left it up to Gabe Paul to pick the manager, and it was my understanding he didn't have a problem with Bill Virdon. But for some reason, he came in the next day after Bill and Gabe Paul had agreed to terms and the contract and everything. And Steinbrenner was livid. He was mad. But in front of the camera, he was all smiles. He goes down and so they hire him. It had been a while since the New York Yankees had been competitive as a franchise. I mean, a decade. And he goes down there, and you had some pretty, you had Bobby Mercer, you had Thurman, you had you did Thurman Munson. You had some really good veteran players, but he goes down to spring training, and those veterans said that was like boot camp because Bill Virdon worked their tails off down there, and they weren't used to that, and they were complaining about it. But Lou Piniella said later, he said when Yankees finally did make it back to the series, I believe in '76, he said, "Let there be no mistaking about it. The reason we're here is because of what Bill Virdon did to us. He got us into shape." So he didn't credit Billy Martin at that time, but Billy was obviously the manager. But he gave full credit to Bill Virdon for getting him back in shape.
So Virdon, leads the Yankees. They played that. Look, the Orioles were a great team. It'd be tough for anybody to overtake the Orioles. The Orioles win the AL East. Yankees finish second, go 89 and 73. And they sort of, I don't want to say stumble, they just couldn't get any momentum really going in 75. And George does it again. And, he got rid of Houck, brings in Virdon. So now we're getting to the pattern because after Virdon, after a 53 and 51 start, he jettisons Virdon, and that's where the entire Billy Martin experience began, New York Yankees. But we're not talking about Billy Martin. We're talking about Bill Virdon. He wasn't unemployed for very long because later that season, the Houston Astros made a managerial change, and they brought in Bill Virdon. So, they got rid of Preston Gomez and
Right.
bring in Virdon. Talk about that.
Well, Tal Smith was in the front office with the Yankee organization. That's where he really got to know Bill Virdon, and Tal got the call to be general manager for the Astros starting in late '75. I think early August, because Tal Smith and Bill were together at the point that Bill got fired. I think on August 1st or August 2nd of '75. Well, Tal goes ahead and goes to Houston. He evaluates Preston, and he gives him a couple of weeks, and then finally he realized he needed to make a managerial change, and he calls up Bill and asks him if he would like to come down and take over as manager for the Astros with 34 games left in the season. And Bill said yes, and because he thought the world of Tal Smith. And he goes 17 and 17 the last 34 games of the season with the Astros, and then Tal Smith and Bill Virdon were just a dynamic duo on turning that losing franchise into a winning franchise by 1980. I mean, they just did a remarkable job together.
Yeah, I mean, Houston wasn't like always the worst team. They were almost an average team, right? They were a tough team. They played a tough brand of baseball, and
well, there was no money to invest in the team because Ford Motor eventually, but because they were in receivership and all kinds of things, so there was no money to spend on players, and so they did a remarkable job starting with what they had.
Right, and I mean he finishes goes 17 and 17 with them. To finish off the 75 season. In 76, 80 and 82. In 77, they go 81 and 81. They dropped off in 78, 74 and 88. But 1979, they have like their best season ever. They go 89 and 73. They finish in second place. And then finally, in 1980, the Houston Astros experience their first championship of any kind. They win the National League West going 93 and 70. Talk about the magic of that year, the satisfaction of doing that, and how the players bought in to the Bill Virdon style that the Yankee players didn't really like.
Well, again, the Yankee players at the time that Bill took over, it was the whole bench was full of veterans pretty much, and so Houston wasn't quite that way. They were younger players, I think, for the most part, and so he could pretty much build them the way he wanted to from the ground up. There were some veteran players. The pitcher Larry Durker, who would go on to eventually manage the Astros, as for instance, H.A. Richard. There's several veteran players on there, um, but it was they recognized they needed to be better than what they were. I'm not sure that Yankees had that same mindset. They were the Yankees after all. And I'm not, and that's not admonishing the Yankees at all, because they've always been a wonderful franchise, and I will never take that away from them. But it was just the mindset, I think, between the two clubs, willingness to want to learn and be better, as opposed to being kind of complacent were the Yankees. And I think that the Houston Astros were welcoming somebody that could make them a better franchise.
So the players, though, they did like what they. Well, again, some of the Yankees were like, "Yeah, this is all because of Virdon. We got over the top because of Bill Virdon." He does take the Astros over the top, gets them into the playoffs in 1980, where they ultimately lose to the Philadelphia Phillies, who were another team that, you know, one of baseball's originals, and they were just a disaster until then. Um, 1981 is an interesting season because that's the strike year where you had two halves,
Right.
and they were they were they were like a 500 team the first half of the year. They went 28 and 29. The second half, it kicked them into gear, and once again, they won the second half. So the playoffs were a little messed up that year, but they won the second half of the year, and ultimately, I think they lost to the Dodgers. They might have lost to the Dodgers in 80. Well, the Dodgers won in 81. So talk about the challenges that he faced in that 1981 season.
Well, after the 1980 season, when they ultimately lost to Philadelphia, I mean, they had to extend the season because they were in such a tight race with the Dodgers before they even went to the NLCS against the Philadelphia Phillies. So they were very tired. They were exhausted. I mean, as a franchise.
Right, because they went 93 and 70, so there was the one game playoff against the Dodgers, which they won.
Exactly. But Bill goes on and becomes the NL Manager of the Year with the Astros in 1980. Tal Smith becomes the Executive of the Year for the National League, and 2 weeks later, into October, he gets fired as the General Manager. I don't think that made Bill real happy going into the 81 season. He would have focused on the field and not so much on the front office, but Tal Smith was very important to him because they were really good friends. And he was just wondering maybe if John McMullen, the owner of the Astros, was not going to fire him next. And so John McMullen was he was a brilliant naval architect. There's no question. And he was very jealous of George Steinbrenner having a ball team. So he decided he wanted to buy a ball team from Ford Motor Company. But he didn't know anything about baseball, nothing. And so Bill had to work with that. Kenny Hand is a sports reporter that I interviewed for the book, and he basically said John McMullen was illiterate when it came to baseball. This all factors into the 81 season, what Bill was faced with without Tal Smith. There were some distractions there, the split season, but I think Bill was able to make an assessment after the first half to make the corrections that were necessary through his leadership to get him fired up for the second half. But Kenny Hand mentioned to me that he mentioned to John McMullen about the farm club. He said, "We own a farm." He said, yes, John. That's where we develop our players." So the players are on a farm, and then he talked. Then he talked to him about, have you ever been down to the dugout? What's the dugout? Where's the dugout?
Come on.
It was that bad. And
You know that he also owned the New Jersey
at the
Devils?
beginning of the '81 season, I think it may have been during spring training in the '81 season, they were Kenny was getting ready to talk to McMullen. He says, what do you think about me maybe making a managerial change? And I guess Kenny Hand, a reporter, just lays into John McMullen, saying that would be the dumbest thing you could possibly do is to replace Bill Virdon. Well, ultimately he did in '82, but yeah, it was a peculiar season. Anytime you have a split season like that, like they did win again in '93 or something like that,
So
kind of throws the momentum off.
in a way, McMullen in '82, they were 49. They didn't have a good season. I don't know what happened, but McMullen just wanted to make a change for change's sake, I guess.
I think the reason he fired Tal Smith because when everybody came in to talk about baseball, they always went to Tal, and I think John McMullen was jealous of that. And Bill Virdon was a carryover from Tal Smith, and so that probably had something to do with it as well.
Well, once again, he wasn't unemployed for long. The following season, he winds up in Montreal with the Expos. How did that come about?
Well, John McHale found out that Bill was available, and they needed a manager, and Bill flew up to Montreal. Then they flew down together to St. Louis during the World Series, and that's when they made the announcement that Bill was now going to be the manager of the Montreal Expos. What happened in the spring of '83? Like I said, Mel Wright was Bill's best friend. He was the pitching coach. He took him to every franchise he ever managed, and Montreal was the last one. Mel had been diagnosed with cancer, and it absolutely took the wind out of Bill Virdon's sails. And so at the beginning of the new season in '83, Mel was suffering really, really bad. And they were getting ready to play a game down in Houston, and I forgot who they were playing in Montreal. But every time the game ended and Bill went to his office, reporters would usually follow him. But the other thing that would happen is Mel Wright would always come by his door, hit the door frame, and that would let Bill know that he came out from the bullpen, and he's going to his office or wherever. This time, Mel didn't do that. And Bill got really, really nervous. So he went looking for him, and Mel was in bad shape. And Bill wanted him to go into a hospital in Montreal at that time. He said, "No, I'm not going to die outside the United States." So he got on the plane with the team, flew down to Houston, and immediately went into the hospital, where he died in May of 1983, right at the beginning of the season. Someone said that that's the only time they ever saw Bill Virdon cry, when he was cleaning out his friend's locker back in Montreal. And that hit Bill really, really hard. But Steve Rogers was on that team as a pitcher. He's from Springfield. I interviewed him for the book. I mean, it was just loaded with stars. I mean, and of course, Pete Rose came in the following year, and Pete didn't do him any favors. Pete was 43 years old at that time and playing in left field. That was about the only place he could play, but he didn't have the arm strength to get the ball in from the outfield. Bill was interviewed by a sportscaster and said, "What do you think about having Pete Rose?" He said, "Well, he's 44 years old." And Pete took exception. He said, "I'm not 44, I'm 43.
Bill liked the Montreal experience, moving north of the border and managing, in Canada.
Well, I think he enjoyed the experience in '83, but '84 was a different story. There was something that he just could not fix. He could not get his hands around it. He didn't know how to fix the problem up there. And he ended up going to McHale I think in early August of '84, and telling him, I'm not coming back next year. Well, McHale goes to the board and tells him that. And they said, well, go ahead and fire him now. So they fired Bill.
Yeah, and they brought back Jim Fanning, who they had canned to bring
Right.
Bill in.
Right. So Bill comes home to Springfield, and someone asked him if he was ever going to manage again. Said probably not. He said, well, would you ever do anything in baseball? I said, yeah, probably if Tal Smith is involved in it. And so he comes home for the winter in '84. Early spring of '85, his good friend Whitey Herzog asked him if he'll come down to spring training with the Cardinals and be a hitting instructor. And Bill said, yeah, I'll do that. Then he spends the summer pretty much at home here in Springfield. And that fall, he gets the call from Jim Leyland with a new manager with the Pittsburgh Pirates in the fall of '85 to be his bench coach.
And that's how really that was it for him as a manager.
Right.
You know, he had, I guess at that point, he had enough. You say that you think that Virdon still has somewhat of an influence the way he managed his longevity in the game has some sort of an influence. Talk about how what his career meant in baseball and how it might still be influencing the game.
His work ethic was off the charts. He was very underappreciated, underrated, but he still went to work every day trying to be the very best that he could be. He set a great example for young ball players. He kept himself in remarkable physical condition as a manager. You know, a lot of managers become managers and their waistline expands, and Bill's never did. I mean, he kept himself in remarkable shape well into his early 80s. There were people down at fantasy camp in Florida when he was in his early 70s, and I had one guy tell me that he looked like he could play center field even then. I mean, he was in that great of shape. I think he was a positive influence on people. I mean, his work ethic, he didn't ask any player to do anything that he wasn't still willing to do himself, and he did it well. When he retired at the end of the '65 season, of course, he played for 2 weeks in '68 because of the Vietnam situation. His last at bat was a home run that put him into extra innings against the Cincinnati Reds. But Bill,
yeah, because I was going to ask you about that. He left in '65, didn't play '66, '67. He's there in '68, and he played a couple of games.
Yeah, last 2 weeks of July of '68. But Bill is a good role model, a good example on how to play the game of baseball. When you cross that chalk line coming out of the dugout onto the ball field, you better be all business because that's what the fans are expecting. That's what everybody's expecting. And you play, you give it your all. I see a lot of players when they hit a ball that looks like it might be a for sure out, they give up on the run to first base. Bill Virdon never tolerated that for a second, because like the Tony Kubek incident, if he would have given up on that, he probably would have been thrown out at first base anyway. But he didn't give up on it. He knew it was a for sure out, but he never gave up on the play. And I think that positive influence on players, because anything can happen in baseball. I mean, it's just the way it's designed. And Bill knew that, and that's what he insisted upon.
How should baseball history remember Bill Virdon?
Well, Bill Virdon and several other players, because of their contribution to the game, how much they loved the game, how good of an example they set, how passionate they were, they were just wonderful ambassadors for the game. They took it very, very seriously because that was their career, just like any other career. That was who they were, and they just gave it their all. And even though Bill was never a flamboyant person, he never bragged on his accomplishments. He let his actions speak for themselves. And that's where he ran afoul with George Steinbrenner. Billy Martin, as good of a ball player as he was, and everything, but he was flamboyant. He was a showman. Bill was neither. He was neither flamboyant or a showman. He was all business. He was a manager. And I would like to think that there are a lot of Bill Virdons out there that have gone underappreciated because they're not a George Brett, or they're not an A-Rod, or they're not a Warren, they're not a, just the list goes on. But there are a lot of players that I think should be elevated to top tier that were never elevated because they just didn't Roberto Clemente made a comment. The reason Bill Virdon doesn't get noticed is because he makes playing look so easy.
That's the way it is. That's the way it's supposed to be. David, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. Bill Virdon, A Life in Baseball. Great book. Thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed it. Some great stories. You've been a terrific guest.
I appreciate it, Warren. It's been a delight to be with you tonight.
Thanks. Anytime.
I appreciate it.
As a player through his career, Virdon hit .267 with 91 home runs, and he knocked in 502. He won the Rookie of the Year in the National League in 1955, and he also won a Gold Glove in 1962, which just happened to be one of his best seasons. It's when he led the National League in triples with 10. As a manager, he led the Pirates and Astros to first-place finishes. He truly had a remarkable career in baseball, both as a player and a manager. Thanks again to my guest today, David Jerome, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. And I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.